The good news is that you can live in God's kingdom, and you can live in God's kingdom now. It's a spiritual dimension which you can live in right now. God's kingdom is a kingdom of love where you can experience God's provision and guidance. It's also a kingdom where you can experience peace and joy. And it's a kingdom where you can experience freedom from addiction, and know others in God's kingdom as family. And in God's kingdom, you know God as your friend and as your king. But the bad news is we're not born into God's kingdom. We're born into our world, and our world is characterized by brokenness. Look around and we see death and disease. We also see wars and disasters. We see a lot of brokenness. We see broken relationships. We see loneliness. We see anxiety and depression. But the good news is that there's a bridge. We can cross over from brokenness to live in God's kingdom. And that bridge is Jesus. You see, God sent Jesus into this world so that we might enter God's kingdom. When Jesus grew up, he spoke about being the Christ, and Christ means king. But the religious leaders rejected him, and they got him crucified with the help of the Romans. But that wasn't the end of Jesus. After 3 days, he rose again, and he's alive. Jesus saw his death as a sacrifice to deal with this problem of brokenness. You see, this brokenness is because of something called sin. Sin is when people go their own way, when people turn to drugs and alcohol, sex and crime, when they turn to materialism, when they turn to suicide. All these things are like bungee cords. They snap us back into brokenness. There's only one way to escape brokenness, and that's by repenting, from turning around, turning from going your own way and going God's way, receiving Jesus as your king. And when you do that, you receive the Holy Spirit to live within you, and you're born again into God's kingdom. And the good news gets better, because if we die in God's kingdom, we go to heaven. But the bad news is if we die separate from Jesus, unforgiven, we go to hell. But God doesn't want people to go to hell. And one day Jesus is going to come again. He's going to establish his kingdom here on earth. So the question I have is, would you like to live in God's kingdom?